Yesterday, everybody, it's Genius bringing you this quick Photoshop tutorial for the Creative Entrepreneur Podcast. We went over this particular design. It is going to be called Visionary. So all I've done is grab my text tool, dropped it into my canvas, and started to type. I'm going to change my text color by highlighting it in the character palette that shows up at the top of the screen. There's also the character palette here that would allow me to change the color. So I'm going to position that, and I am going to go into the font because this is a font heavy design, changing it to something that stands out in a mind's eye kind of way. I'm going to make that larger again, even larger still. Now, with this being said, I am going to find a shape. Now I'm going to change the shape, and that shape is going to include right now this, which I will stretch to get into about the shape that I need it. And then I'm going to go to the Path palette. Actually, I'll go to the Layers palette first, create a new layer, go to the Path palette, and then I will fill that path with the foreground color. It's a little bit of gray. I can turn off that path. I can go back to my layer, get my marquee tool. Actually, I'm going to control click on the layer to highlight the active pixels. Then I'll get my marquee tool and click and drag just about halfway of that image, and I will hit the mask and mask it out. Go to the V. So I've come over to pixabay.com, free stock image site, pixabay.com, and I have identified these eyes from this owl, and I'm going to isolate these eyes, and this is going to really show up my image. So I can right click on that, copy image, go back over into Photoshop, add a new layer, and control V that image. Now I want to convert that image to a smart object by right clicking and convert to smart object. Then I can double click on it, and it will open up in its own canvas. Now what I can do with this particular one is go for my pen tool. Now the pen tool takes a little training to get used to. You just click and drag, click and drag, click and drag all along your shape, and you can drag further or less and hit the Alt key to shorten your stroke as you are rounding corners. You drag to keep the roundness. You click to create a point from which to drag. And I will continue to go around this image. Click and drag. Coming back the opposite direction, click and drag, hold the Alt key to change direction. I'm keeping the exact contour of the eye as best I can. wonderful thing about circles is once you find the majority of the curve, most of it can be pulled out fairly easily. Now, I didn't need an exact cut of that eye. I could go in this area and clean it up quite a bit. And this area in the top, I've supposed to myself that this is the area that I want. So I'm going to go to the paths palette, double click on the work path to make it a saved path, and then I will go to the load path as a selection tool. Going back to my layers palette, I'll hit I will go to my marquee tool and then refine edge, which gives me a pretty good facsimile of what I want. I'm going to bring up the contrast significantly on this one though. Get me a very hard edge on it. That'll be good. And then I'll mask that, and then I'll Control S that, and I can close the document, and now I have isolated just the eye. Now the shape of that eye is not perfect, so we're going to have a little fun with that in just a second. Continuing with the idea that I had, I'm going to go V with that eye and move it, and then I'm going to go Control T, and I'm going to slightly rotate it till it looks level to me. It's all visual, so now I'll move it down and hit enter. Then I can basically highlight the layer, go to the marquee tool, find somewhat of a center point on that eye, go across, go make sure my proper layer is highlighted, and hit Control J, which will duplicate it. Then I can Control T that section, and I will rotate it holding the Shift key. Then I'll hit enter, V, so I can move it, and I will basically zoom in a little bit, Control plus to zoom in, and I will basically move this around using my arrow keys until I get it basically lined up properly. Now that is close to aligned for the actual eye, and it does look pretty good having duplicated. It got rid of the points on one side but made them somewhat symmetrical. Now these are going to be hard to match very, very well because of the rotation, so I'm going to just kind of work it till I get it to space, and now I've seen that I need to maybe slightly expand it. Yeah, that's matching better. Now there's that unsightly line in the middle, so I'm gonna add a layer by hitting my layer palette. I'm gonna go to my clone stamp tool, gonna hit Alt and pull out my sample, which is sampling all layers. I'm gonna pull out some of the image and paint in. Control Z that. I'm going to make my brush smaller and Alt paint, Alt click in a darker area, and then drag, moving again, and drag, and on the opposite side I can Alt click and then drag. Now that gets rid of the line but creates some other lines, so I'm going to go to my blur tool. I'm going to rub this all out. And for the most part, I've gotten rid of those lines. Now this one is harder because it was very far away in color from the original. So what I can do is go back to my clone stamp tool and pull some color from somewhere else and paint it in. Because again, what I'm doing is just getting rid of that line. I'll go back to my blur tool and rub it out. Now I'm doing a lot of stuff really quickly. Control 0. Visionary is what we're dealing with now. I want to turn by holding shift and going to convert to smart object, turn all of that into one object. Then I'm going to right click on it and go to black and white to knock the color out of it. Then I'm going to right click on it again and I'm going to go to levels and I'm going to force out a lot of white out of there. I'm going to force up some black out of there and hit OK. Now I've got a nice kind of separated image. This shape in the background, my background image shape, is going to get some kind of color overlay like red for now, and I'm going to make that a little pinkier. I still want it kind of redder though. And then the font that I chose is okay, but not necessarily the most visible from a distance. So what we'll do is color overlay. We will change this red back to a good gray that's in the same spectrum. I want it a little darker. That's good. Make it a little brighter. That's good. And okay, now I'm going to leave the word visionary in that original font. I'm going to duplicate the font, or duplicate the layer, and on that new layer I'm going to change fonts. So I found a slab serif font with much more weight that was giving me the opportunity to have some surface to draw on. I'm going to change the color of that font to right now match this background, and then I'm going to bring the old one in front of the new. Much better design that we're working with here now. And now it's time for us to do a little bit of wizardry with the whole thing. Only by watching Ingenious do you find these types of things out. We're going to new group from layers and call it Orig. Now I'm going to right click on it, duplicate, cancel, right click, duplicate, the image, and now I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Image, Mode, Grayscale, don't rasterize, OK, discard, shifting me to grayscale, and then I'll go Image, Mode, Bitmap. OK, 300 pixels, that's good screenage for now, and wham. And after removing the white background, you now have a design that can be styled in any color combination. This is Ingenious with the Creative Entrepreneur Podcast, Visionary.